a big welcome to everybody. We're really pleased that you've taken the time to come and join us. We're doing something that we think is really important, looking at strategies to support writing. And we're very aware that within the participant list that we've got today, there are people who are working at all ends of the writing continuum, academic writing at one end, possibly supporting students in postdoctoral work, all the way down to students who are perhaps working in a second language, who are just learning English for the first time, or who are struggling for all sorts of reasons. And writing is best viewed as that continuum. And we're going to be looking at that today because we're very aware that because of the monocultural kind of text-based education systems we have, quite often, if students don't acquire the skills of writing, then they find it very hard to effectively show their knowledge in all the other curriculum areas they're working in. So just a bit of background to us. This is the 6th webinar in a series. We've got supporting reading, we've got flipping the classroom, we've got knowing what students know, and all sorts of other things that you can look at on the website and look at your leisure. We're very much focused on pedagogy and technology, not technology for its own sake, but technology only in as much as it serves good pedagogy. And you'll be able to look at this resource at any point afterwards. I'll give the link to you very shortly. And you'll be able to come back to this anytime. So if there are times when we're going through it a little bit quickly, then don't worry, don't think, oh, I've got to take notes or something, because you'll be able to get back to this. These are the 3 of us, if you're trying to visualize us. One day we'll mix the names and the people so that you have to guess who is who. I think.
Alistair, could you just refresh that page that you're on?
Yeah, I'll do that. Ah! Sorry, I had it open too long. And this is our Christmas edition.
Only because Alistair, we felt that Alistair had grown made himself look very sage-like, and we were a bit jealous of that.
So I didn't realise that, and that's a very interesting update. So that'll be even more interesting to try to guess who's who, and you can find out more about the Future Teacher project as well. So let's just start by getting to the nub of it. We'd like to start often with the story or with something that just sets the scene. And the story I want to start with, or it's not even a story, it's just a description really, that I think is so important that when we're communicating with our students, our learners, that we help them realize that writing is about immortality and it's about omnipresence. And I've just spent a few moments thinking, right, who are the people that I would regard as really formative in my life, in my thinking, in the way I kind of feel, etc. And I found, to my interest, that many of my best friends, counsellors and life affirmers are dead and have been dead for centuries before I was born. So there's just a quick list there of the people whose thinking has informed my life, and for one reason only, because they wrote things down. And or the bottom of the list there, people that I find fantastically inspiring and I've never met in my life because they live too far from me. They're alive, but they haven't got the omnipresence of me being able to get inside their heads and their hearts and their spirits from their writing. So I thought it's worth us thinking. As teachers, we so often get kind of narrowed down into this thing about writing is assessment, assessment is assignment, assignment is qualifications, etc. But let's just step back for a little bit sometimes and think, if we can communicate that writing is this joyous immortality and omnipresence, then that, I think, will be a good service for our students. So in the text chat pane, here is the link so that you can open this up on your own. And that will mean, you'll have to perhaps do a little bit of moving between windows. We've got everything, all the activities embedded in this learning object, so it shouldn't be too many windows for you to open, just 2 really. One, the Zoom window to see what's happening on our screen, and then your own version. Okay, so that's us getting active and independent. So Lillian is going to ask you to move to the next slide. Once you've opened, move to slide 5 in the learning object, because you're now going to do something active, but you'll need to do it on your learning object, not on Lillian's screen share. Or do you want me to screen share? Do you want to talk over my one? What do you want to do, Lil?
Yeah, no, you carry on the screen share.
Okay.
So everyone should be on page 5, which is an answer garden, which we've embedded onto the Xerte object. And what I'd like you to do is to type. You know how Twitter has extended their message to 280 characters? Well, we've done the opposite. We're giving you 20 characters, and you can type as many things as you like, and it's going to form a word cloud. So if you're in the Xerte object, you can start typing. What are the different types and purposes of writing? So I'm going to start typing, and maybe Alistair, you can as well.
Yeah, I've started.
That's really good. So you can all see how, as you type, other people's ideas are coming out onto the screen, which makes it really visible. Through writing, we can actually make our thoughts visible, which is something we really like. Okay. So I love the fact that if you refresh your screen, if you haven't typed anything in it recently, the biggest word in there is reflection. That's lovely, isn't it? It's how writing makes us conscious of our thinking. I think that's the amazing thing about writing that we've identified there. I'm just going to refresh one more time and see. Communication, reminders, consolidation, and just notes. So that's lovely. This really helps us to have a feel for what you think about writing, journalism, sharing ideas, academic reflection, poetry, fiction. The word haiku isn't there. Oh, I like apologizing. That's quite funny. Okay, and inspiring. I think that's really nice as well. Okay, so that's Answer Garden, and that's a nice activity to embed. It's nice for us to share our ideas. If we move on to the next slide, so this is slide 6, we're going to engage you in pros and cons, if you like, positives and negatives about writing. You know, why is writing seen as an advantage? Why is it seen as a disadvantage? So this screen just describes to you how you're going to interact with a tool called Tricida. It's spelt tri-cider, like 3 types of cider, just to confuse us. So if you understand what this graphic tells you about where to add text, where to add an idea, and how to vote for an existing idea, then you can move on to the next page, page 7. And you can add a new idea at the bottom of the screen. You can add an argument to say yes or no to something that Alistair has already posted. And you can vote for the ideas as they come on the screen. So give us some reasons why you think writing is a good way to assess student learning. How are we doing with the people are probably composing?
Yeah, we're getting some in already.
Yep.
I'm
Okay.
voting for some as well.
Yep. Open-ended
other
question.
than mine.
Okay. Encourages deeper thinking. Yep, I would vote that, although I kind of think sometimes encourages deeper thinking.
I'm just going to refresh this page just in case there are other things that people are adding that I haven't seen.
Yeah, if you keep refreshing your screen, it's really good. It allows you to see what's come in. Forms a record. So apart from adding ideas, you can vote for the ideas.
And of course, we're demonstrating this obviously to kind of pull together a range of ideas from the very broad range of participants we've got, but you could equally be using these with your students as a mini writing exercise. There's a nice one. Very little technology required. I'm definitely voting for that.
In the old days, if you were in the days of slates and stuff, just imagine pre-reading and writing. That wasn't an option for anyone who was trying to teach. They had to use their voice only.
Yes, yes.
Or dramatize it, or paint it. Okay, so quite a few people have said, you know, a good reason is to kind of make clear what learners know or don't know. I do like, Teresa, what you said there, managing way of collecting examples from other students, because students do like to be able to see what other people are doing, just to kind of set their own, just to kind of internally set a benchmark, I guess. Assess understanding of concepts, etc. Okay, that's really good. So this is Trisida for you.
Shall I move on to the next one?
Yeah, so we've got 6 votes for deeper thinking. The same activity on the next page, page 8, but here are some reasons, if you'd like to put some reasons against using writing, just to balance our discussion a little bit. Okay. Need to show other forms of communication and ideas. Yes, other forms of communication nowadays, especially, I think, when we have so much different media available to us. Some people have physical difficulty writing, yep. Does not allow for the same level of engagement. That's right. Not everyone's favorite way of expressing themselves is through words. That's brilliant. I think everyone's kind of made themselves, it's quite clear that people understand the pros and cons of assessing using writing, or even just using writing as a means of viewing other people's understanding. Thank you very much. Okay, I think we're all right here, Alistair, okay, to move on to the next slide.
Right, well, what I want to do very briefly is to give you a theoretical framework for thinking about writing, because this is one of the things that I think quite often as teachers and as academics and educationalists and tutors and so on, we have not necessarily been taught how to think about writing ourselves. It's something we've acquired through writing lots of essays or assignments in our journey. And one of the things, when you start looking into the research, and we've got links for the research here, is that as soon as you begin to look in detail at how you think about writing, you end up with all sorts of different strategies. Now, I'm not going to go over these in tremendous depth now, but there are implications of these that we will be expanding on, and we'll be inviting you to expand on. So there are the rhetorical, metacognitive, cognitive, communicative, social, affective, and mindset stroke emotion. Now, this isn't a single framework. I've adapted these from several frameworks in the research and added a little bit down the bottom, the mindset one. So this is a bit of a combination, and there are links in here to some of the resources, and we've made sure that we've used, where possible, we've used open access resources, so they're not behind paywalls. So, for example, the rhetorical strategies, somebody's drawn a red line, they're marking me already. Organization, You know, a student knowing the overall shape and structure of a piece, a student considering the sort of genre, you know, do I do this in a conversational style for a blog post, or is this an academic formal style? The use of first language is a very important one. If you've got international students, very often they kind of generate ideas in their first language and then translate them into the new language. That can equally apply in terms of people trying to understand academies. You know, do we help students to translate from plain English to academic English? The metacognitive elements of thinking are planning and then monitoring and evaluating. And one of the things that you'll notice for each of these, and you can go through this at your leisure when you've got a chance to read this in more detail if you want. But what we've done is we've tried to pick out what are the key questions that should inform thinking if you're trying to teach writing and support writing more effectively. Monitoring and evaluation is that whole thing about knowing that as you read through things, you think, okay, that's important, but that bit's less important, and helping to understand. In terms of cognitive elements, we've got links there to how you can generate ideas in different ways. The generating ideas is part of the cognitive element, but equally is revising, adapting, reordering things, and encouraging students that revision is a positive process. So many students, and we'll see this when we look at mindset and emotion, so many students have this idea that if you don't write it right first time, somehow you're a weak student. It's exactly the opposite. That, you know, the more you revise, the more you see writing as a revisionist, reordering, redrafting process, the better the writing is. Clarification is one of the cognitive elements. And again, there's questions that we can ask. How can you help students be more clear if you're giving them model answers, sort of model essays, model assignments? Why don't you include distractors as well and let them know there are distractors there, so that they become confident at clarifying and separating the real gold from the dross? Summarizing is part of that cognitive process. And there are communicative areas as well. Verbalization, reduction, going from lots of things to thinking, no, actually, I'm just going to leave some of those out, being aware of the reader and who the reader is, what they actually need. So as we go through these, and I won't go through all of these now, but what I will do is say that each of these has questions related to it, and each of those questions, how do you do this, how do you do that? If you can answer any of those questions, you can support students more effectively. So what we've done, we've taken the questions that we've asked there, and we'd like you, on your learning object, on your local version, on page 10, we'd like you just to skim down through the questions. Don't answer all of them. You probably can't answer all of them. But we'd like you to pick out one or two where you say, oh yes, we do this, or this is how I do that. So on page 10, I'll be quiet for a bit. It's a Google form, so just type your answers for a few selected questions there, maybe 2 or 3. Type what you do, and we'll come back to this at the end because we'll revisit as part of our embedding this in your academic practice and your teaching practice, whatever context you work in. So click submit once you've filled in a couple of answers, and you'll then have a chance to look at things that other people have done, but we'll be revisiting that in a moment. So that's over to you. Looking at the questions now, pick just 1 or 2, type in there. How to participate? Yes, sorry if we've missed you there. If you haven't got it, have you got the text chat pane? If you haven't got the text chat pane, move your mouse on the window that we're talking in, the Zoom window. Move your mouse down to the bottom and click on the text chat pane, which should be there. If you can't see it, there may be a sort of 3 buttons that says more. Click on chat, and then when you get to the chat, if you missed the earlier link to the learning resource, I'll pop it in again, and it's just going to be the thing that's right at the top of the chat pane now. Oh, sorry, the last entry in the chat pane. learningapps.co.uk/writing. And once you have that open up locally, then you can go to page 10 of that using the bottom right navigation bars. And then you'll be able to type in there. Yeah, apologies if you missed that earlier link. And there's also a slight potential for confusion because you don't want to be trying to fill it in on the Zoom screen, because that's me screen sharing what I have. You want to fill it in on your own version. And the reason for that is that you can then come back to it any time. That link will persist.
I also added the direct link to the Google form just in case.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Yeah.
New window. It's perhaps worth repeating, Alistair, that people don't need to answer every single question there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, just have a look down and answer one or two questions, and some of them can be just very short answers. We don't want essays, ironically, for a writing session. Just short answers. How do you do this? How do you do that? Do you do this? Do you do that? And what we want to identify is, given that every one of these questions is taken from the theoretical frameworks, and we've kind of adapted those frameworks to classroom practice, lecture theatre practice, etc., seminar practice, how many gaps are there when we get to the end? What are the things that we might need to explore more? So, if you are still writing, still submitting questions, then that's great. Just kind of finish off the one you're about to submit. We will look at those later. We'll look at all of those shortly. But what we want to do now, we've gone from the theoretical. We've tried to make the theoretical practical in a broad sense by inviting all, however many there are of you. I think there was 50 participants. We've invited all of you to contribute in some way, what you do, what you don't do. What I want to do now is to bring that right down into a single case study, where we're inviting Teresa McKinnon from Warwick to go through with us how Teresa works with her students. So I am going to be the glamorous assistant.
Everybody should have one.
Yes, and most of them should be more glamorous than me. Yeah.
I couldn't possibly comment. So maybe, Alistair, if I start off just giving a little, just with this title slide, giving a little bit of context.
Okay, I'll go back then.
And obviously people can move through the slides at their own speed anyway.
Yes, of course.
My context is that I'm a French language teacher working at the Language Centre at the University of Warwick. I've been teaching languages for 30 years. I've been very pleased to be part of a lot of work that's happened, how we assess and to look at how we support student experience to offer a really great language learning experience. Most of our students are coming to us to learn often a second, third, or even fourth language. So many are international students. And the student group that I have been working with most closely over the last few years has been an international cohort of students who are learning French through English, despite the fact that their mother tongue very often is something totally different. They're not all necessarily Romance language speakers. Some are Italian, some are Spanish, and that clearly helps the process of learning another Romance language. But many are from very different linguistic backgrounds, from Finland, for example. So perhaps if we look then at what we do to make sure that we can support students in these situations to actually arrive at a good understanding of language use, and in my case of French language use. You may find, if you're not sort of aware of how we categorize language skills, you may find if you just Google the letters CEFR, the Common European Framework of Reference, you may find that is quite informative, just to give a context for how linguists analyze and understand language capability and language abilities. Because often we think of, perhaps when we set tasks, written tasks, that we sort of clarify, or in our own minds, that this is an easy or a difficult task based on perhaps the complexity of the ideas, but not necessarily on how complex the expression of those ideas through a language is. So I'm hoping that by having this opportunity to think about the details of the language, that may be useful and interesting for you to apply to your own areas. So first of all, I've just categorized these into three broad categories. First of all, in the early days of new language use, what we want to do primarily is to build confidence. And this sort of returns back to Alistair's frameworks earlier, if we're thinking about the affective factors of engaging with writing. We want, obviously, people to have the words, and we know that it takes numerous times of exposure of words in a variety of settings in order to really build a concept of what that word means. So some of the tools that we use for these sorts of activities include, and I believe the links are clickable, but also you've got them very handily up at the top there, which is really helpful. So if we come to perhaps the first, some of the first tools, the mind mapping. I don't think we need to illustrate that for you. I'm sure mind mapping is something, and brainstorming is something you regularly use. But making that fun just to collect some of the key language together, perhaps in groups within a class. In my class, I use a lot of Google Doc, shared docs to collect language. So the collect language example there is a shared revision. There's a shared revision link, and there's also, this one is a shared story writing task that's carried out between English language speakers and French language speakers. So they're collaborating here on producing a story. So this is a little bit more advanced, but how people are helping each other to think about the concept behind the language and how they would use it, and then adding their feedback. And it's a fun activity to do. Giving a nice creative context for the activities. So even though these may be activities that are actually supporting our final output or our final assessment, we want to give people activities that are meaningful and fun and not entirely focused on that end point. So using images, for example, using audio recordings. The example I've given you there is actually within the class I'd given out some digital recorders, and the students had to produce little audio recordings which they then put onto this thing link to share with each other. So they've given little examples of dialogues, and through that we're revising the vocabulary. These are students who are in the very early stages of learning a language. So we're just having fun with the speaking. And it's very important to actually enable students to speak before you ask them to write. That's the way of working for language acquisition. So we make sure that they hear lots of good examples of language.
I think you may have dropped your audio, Teresa. We can't hear you. I know there was a little bit of Wi-Fi issue earlier.
Spoken examples of good language, writing and capturing those things in different contexts. There we go.
You're here.
Sorry, just came back. Thanks, Leo. I'm not far away. I've got a bit of a dodgy Wi-Fi connection here. So in the second slide here, we're thinking of slightly more advanced language use here, where we want to make sure that students can see examples of good writing, and they can understand them and understand the decisions that have been made by the writers of them. So reading examples of the sorts of things that they're working towards, maybe examples that they then are asked. I'm getting a bit of echo, I'm afraid, Alistair. I'm not sure there.
It's fine for us. So,
oh, okay, good. Yeah. So you've got a little bit of an opportunity then to interact with those tasks by perhaps creating subheadings, and to get them to really think about what is covered in this paragraph and what is covered in that paragraph, and how would you reorder it. So even cutting up really nice examples of text and asking them to put them back in the order and to justify their choices. These activities are really helpful in preparing them to think about how they order their work. Creating that atmosphere where drafting and feedback are very important. So drafting and giving people several opportunities to revisit tasks is really helpful to build your confidence. And this little video here is an example of using screen capture for feedback. And this was one of the techniques that we exemplified in the Video for All project, a European project I was involved in, where really we found that, and other studies have found this as well, that the students were really responsive to your voice all the time in the classroom. So rather than getting a marked piece of work back with lots of red lines, actually speaking through on screen capture and returning either an audio or a video of that process was really helpful for students. And vitally, if you're thinking of preparing writing for assessment, it needs to be really clear how you're marking and what you're marking for. So clearly, this is marking criteria for our lower levels at European Common Standard of Framework of Reference. But you can see from the sorts of descriptions there how we're thinking about how language is used. And it's very clear then for the student to look at this and know how to improve. And that's very important too.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I think you
finally,
make a very good
and I know
point.
we're very short of time, so let's move to the final slide. So this, I think, is probably the one most important message that we all have to take on board when we want people to write. Earlier can be seen as just what we do to assess. But in fact, to be good writers, we need to explore how our writing appears in all sorts of different ways. So constraints are often very useful in communicating effectively. So the whole process of using Twitter, for example, there is a Twitter feed called Histoire en 6 mots that you're seeing now, where you're seeing French people writing just 6 words, and in these 6 words there's a whole story behind them. These are just examples of how in language use constraints can be really useful in developing your ability to communicate succinctly. The one that you're seeing there is the use of the free open software called Storybird, where the use the book provided, in effect, it's a digital book provided with the illustrations and everything else, and then they move through this and tell a story, they write a story, and they end up with something that looks really professional and satisfying as well. Great way of exploring communication skills with students. And of course, encouraging people to work together to improve on what they're doing. So again, we tend to do that through shared Google Docs. There's lots and lots of different ways you can set up collaborative writing, even with small groups, just to help people understand how the process works in different minds, and to encourage them to question each other and to ask for understanding and negotiate meaning. That's the process we talk about in language use.
That's great, Teresa. Well, really sorry. Yes, sorry we've had to
move on. Yes, we need to
move on, but that's been brilliant. I think the really key thing there is that slide 11, page 11 on the Xerte object, you can get back to any point, and we've got all of those different links there.
Great.
So thank you very much.
Okay. No, you're very welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, and we'd really like to encourage people to join us on the discussion list. Teresa's in there as well. And if you've got any questions for Teresa, I'm sure the discussion list is going to be a great way for us to all explore our questions, and we can ask her in more depth rather than the chat pane about her experience and her case studies. Thanks, Teresa.
Yeah, that's great. Fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, so if you can carry on sharing, Alistair, we're going to move on to this mind map. Now, when Alistair, Ron, and I start to think about or map out how we're going to run this session, we almost inadvertently always end up in a mind map where we dump all our ideas. So that's an example of our writing. And then we start to see the patterns that emerge. So we're going to show you a little bit of our thought process. You know, we ended up kind of categorizing things into the following formats that you can see on the Xerte object that's on screen now. But the main thing that we want to tie in from the ideas and the frameworks and the case studies is the tools. As TEL people, I think we're all quite, we can see the potential of TEL tools to actually engage and to make a difference. So we'd like you to explore the tools area in the mind map. Before you go there, we'd like you to explore the tools area in the mind map, and then we'd like you to come back into the chat and just tell us if there's something you already use to good effect or something you've not yet heard of that you're quite excited about, and just share with us an idea that you're going to take away from looking at the tools. So for you to actually go to the mind map, I'm going to put the link in the chat pane. So you can click on that link and that will take you to the actual mind map itself. Look in the tools area. You can explore the whole mind map obviously after this session as well and come back to this mind map anytime. But explore the tools area. Pick something that stands out for you as something you already do to good effect or something that you've not thought of yet, and share with us in the chat pane your ideas. Or if you think there's a gap, is there something missing that you think should be in there?
And you'll also find that we've gone through all of those tools and we've either given a description or a link to where you can find out more about them or download them. And while you're looking at these, just bear in mind that these will help you answer some of those questions that came out of the frameworks and came out of the Teresa's case studies. You know, how can we make acquisition of writing skills more exciting, more collaborative, more effective?
Okay, we'll just give everyone another 30 seconds looking through, and then we'd really like to hear your thoughts because you could probably spend another hour looking through the mind map.
We have a day's worth of training in this 1 hour session.
Well, it's worth saying at this point, Alistair, Lillian, that although these webinars are quite hurried, the topics are going to form the longer part of the journeys that we're developing and will be freely available to everybody as soon as we've developed them, I suppose, in the new year. So look out for news for that, and we'll mention that before the end of this session as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I think, yeah, some of us definitely enjoy using mind maps to put our thoughts down and then reorganize. You can start to see the patterns that come out. I switch between mind maps and just you typing and using outlines to organize myself. That's brilliant, Teresa. Another nice link to delve into. I'm sure that I will add to the mind map after the session. Okay.
And I think one of the things we're really keen, if you've got something there where you think, I mean, already a couple of people have started putting some examples. If you've got things that you already use that work really well, pop them in. Pop in any of your favorite tools, because we're going to show you our favorite tools.
Yeah, Leo, I quite agree. I think this is always a nice bit when people get to this point and we're sharing all the ideas and tools that we know. People do like having access to a curated list of resources, I think, focused on one particular topic. We can take that and share that with so many teachers. Okay. So being conscious of time, Coggle. Okay, yep, that sounds good. I'm going to suggest that we, again, either carry on with the discussion on the discussion list and move on in our webinar presentation. So if we move on to the next page, we're just going to run you through one feature of our Future Teacher Talks is that we always share with you how we apply a set of tools or frameworks ourselves to the way we do things, and sometimes it's quite personal. So Alistair's going to share with you his personal methods now.
My personal methods. Intriguingly, the thing I love best about helping develop writing skills is Microsoft Word, and I've been doing this since I think 1999. I started doing this with students, and we had some fantastic results by decomposing model answers. Instead of giving people model answers, we actually took model answers apart. We took mediocre questions or mediocre answers and got students to upgrade them. But just being able to move things around, cut and paste, drag and drop in Word was brilliant. So I've put links here to some of the things that I developed with my students and with some of the other staff I was working with at the time. Now these are all A-level style, so they will maybe a bit not quite sophisticated enough if you're in an HE background, and maybe they're too sophisticated if you're in adult community learning. But the principles are really effective. So model answer, but scrambling it, so you get a really good model answer, but on its own it's useless for developing skills. So take it apart, just move the paragraphs around. Students have to put it back together. So they're only thinking about one thing. They're only thinking about the prioritizing of the information and the sequencing. And there's all sorts of advantages there, not least for teachers, which is exactly the reason my vested interest got me involved in that. Upgrading mediocrity. There's a nice example there of a psychology essay where it was a C grade, and we had some little notes, marginal notes, saying, well, this would be better if this point was expanded, and leaving an area for the student to kind of put in a red italic font in the text box that their interpretation of what should go in, what was missed out. Incredibly easy to mark because we only mark the red bits. In other words, the way they've gone from basic information to fuller arguments. Dealing with distractors, that's an economics one that I used with colleagues, and we gave them some headings for the particular assignment they were responding to. We gave them a bunch of headings and a bunch of supply and demand flow, supply and demand graphs. But some of them were distractors. They had to identify the distractors, delete them, work out from the ones that were relevant how they would fit together in a logical order, and then write the essay. And again, we had really good results from that. Teresa talked about having the marking rubric. There's an example here where I got extracts from an A-level essay, and the students had to use either bold, underline, or italic in order to mark elements that corresponded to things that the rubric was looking for. You know, good use of examples, relevance to the key, relevance to the question, that sort of thing. And then the last one, and there's a little screenshot of the last one on the top right here. I used to get students who would think, when I was teaching natural hazards, they would think that a particular earthquake was the only case study that you would use to a particular question. And I wanted to break them away from that and say, look, you can use the same case study to answer all kinds of different questions, or you can have different questions that all use the same case study. And so that was a very simple kind of mix and match. Here's a paragraph that would use that case study for title A or title B or title C. Which is it? Why do you think it is? And then go on and write the rest of the essay. And then from personal use, I use voice recognition on a daily basis because it just saves me time, saves me RSI, and helps me kind of almost get into stream of consciousness. Okay. Lillian.
Oh, mine's very easy. I've done it from a very kind of personal point of view, the way I use tools to help me write. I'm doing a part-time master's at the minute and loving it, but some of the reading and writing and trying to kind of herd cats into an essay is what I feel like I'm doing half the time. And I seem to have my ideas the most when I'm driving in the car, which is quite inconvenient because I can't write it down. But I have a little mic in the car, a little mic recorder, and I try and make sure I record what I say and then transcribe it. And half the time, half my essay is made up of these tenuous links between ideas. The other thing I think we've already said we do, that I certainly do, type into a mind map, or else just do a typing exercise, stream of consciousness typing exercise, just to get over the worry about getting it right first time. And then what I do is I highlight key ideas in a heading style, so I can start to collect together the similar ideas, and then I can see in the outline the form that it's taking. The other thing I find has been very useful is obviously just making sure that I keep a diary or a reflective log, and then going back and looking back through it as well. I think maybe the students, it's easier to tell students to keep a reflective log, but the real learning comes when they go back and look over their own writing to see the distance traveled. But that's me, on to Ron.
Thanks, Alistair. If you can open that one. I think most of the tools that I've got listed here have been covered in the text chat or in the mind map, but I kind of you've got a sense that what we're doing is sharing our own personal workflows as well as the tools and the methods and the workflows that we kind of support and recommend to learners that we work with, be they staff on CBD sessions or students. And the one thing that always surprises me is just how much it's still not changed, that people see mobile learning as somehow a separate thing, whereas the stats all indicate that, you know, the vast majority of online access is via mobile devices. So that mobile workflow, the ability to take notes, to write wherever you are and whenever the ideas happen, I think is an important thing to kind of encourage and be mindful of. So I'll often use a mix between technology and non-technology methods. So, you know, good old paper and notes in whatever form it takes. Evernote and OneNote have both been mentioned in the text chat, I think. One of the things I like about OneNote, and if you hover over that when you're looking at the learning object, you'll get a little summary of, is the ability to just brainstorm a whole load of lists, which is similar to but different to a mind map in terms of you can just add everything to a number of lists and then drag and drop things as you move them from one list to the other, and it's quite quick and quite a positive workflow. The other slight difference perhaps with what's been discussed already is I'm a big fan of sketchnoting, but sketchnoting for personal note-taking and synthesis and analysis and so on. And so things like Rocket Books, which I put a link to there, allow you to sketchnote into a paper book, but then send those to things like email and Dropbox or wherever you want it to go, Google Docs and so on. there's links there. The iPad apps that I typically use for note taking is an app called Concepts and an app called Work Visual, but I'm sure you have your own preferences. And I think in the mind map, we all know Notepad and Word and Google Docs, but I think Alistair listed Hemingway as also a good tool for helping you to write for the web, for instance, and simplify your writing or improve your writing, and using that tool rather than Word, or using similar plugins in Word to allow you to do that. Apologies, we're rushing through these things, but we do want to get to the point where you can move on to the final activity that we have. So I think it's back to Lillian or Alistair.
It's Alistair now who's going to talk you through our thinking. And again, we always try and tie things back into our models of learning.
Indeed, yeah. Sorry, I was chatting away, but I had myself muted. We talked about the frameworks for writing, and again, Teresa very helpfully gave us some references there on the European frameworks. And I just want to remind you that this still all piles back into one of the key models that we've been looking at during all these different sessions, which is the TPAC, Technology, Pedagogical Content, Technology Knowledge, Pedagogical Knowledge, and Content Knowledge. And really effective teaching requires us to have a good grounding in each of those areas. We need to know the content, we need to know how to teach the content, we need to know how to use technology effectively to do those. What we're trying to show in this session is that because we had that other framework, the framework of kind of writing skills, that's almost like a shadow TPAC. So whether anybody in this, in this session at the moment is teaching, teaching English as a second language, or teaching psychology or law or physics or whatever, that technology, pedagogy, and content bit actually has an underlying, what we call a sort of shadow TPAC, which is that how do you give the students the skills? You may know about teaching, but do you know about teaching writing? Do you know about helping students unpack the elements of writing, or indeed reading, or any other skills? But in our context, we just want to remind people that looking at TPAC in this way is really important, because if you've got good pedagogy but you can't teach students to write, that's a whole new set of skills. Ron, you wanted to just look at the results from what people looked at earlier, see if there's any particular gaps.
Yes, and what I will do, because that view in the learning object isn't great, Alistair, I'll put the link to the results that everybody can view in the text chat. So perhaps you could open that, because that format that's embedded doesn't make it very easy to read, does it? Which, interestingly, we talked about reading in the last webinar. You wouldn't want people to
to read this,
to read that display.
Well, try the link that I've put in the text chat, because that's okay.
Yeah, I already put.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. Oh, I see. Okay, good.
But I'm also conscious, Alistair, that actually we want to do the just one thing activity, and we've already kind of overrun a bit to get to that point. So I wonder whether we can just say that people can review these responses by everybody, and it's a great example of crowdsourcing responses. And I'm sure for most of us here, Google Docs and Google Forms are a common method of doing exactly that. These are available to you beyond,
and well worth reading as well. Just skipping through, have a look at what other people have suggested for areas that you might find difficult to support, or that you haven't yet explored. So great. So shall I go on to the next one?
Yeah. So just a very quick reminder that our mailing list isn't for us sending spam or to advertise anything that you have to pay for. Everything we do is being made freely available. But we do find that people are not necessarily subscribing, perhaps because of a concern over how busy mailing lists can get. But it's going to be our main vehicle for communicating and for So please do join that. Please do contribute to it as well. If you move on, Alistair. So in the text chat, one thing we'd like you to do, and that we do at the end of each of these webinars, is just to get you to reflect very quickly just what one thing you would do as a result of what we've discussed so far in this webinar today. And top of the list often is review the recording, review the resources that we've shared. But if you can, please be more specific than that. What one thing has kind of stood out for you that might be useful in your own practice? Lillian, Alistair, have you got any more things you'd like people to comment on?
No, I'd just like to say that, you know, I've learned quite a bit from looking at people's contributions, certainly from Teresa's examples. It's always good to kind of hear how people are actually implementing some of the strategies that we're talking about.
Yeah, and I completely agree. There's some brilliant stuff that's in those, in the answer garden, in the Tricida results, and in the final Google surveys as well. So please do go back to that Xerte object, have a look at it again, talk about these things with your colleagues as well, and show colleagues the sorts of resources, because they're free for you to use and to use in your own training if you want to.
I agree, Amanda. I really liked, I'm just looking at the text chat, sorry, Alistair, but I agree. I really liked Alistair's presentation of the TPAC and the shadow of the TPAC. And in fact, maybe we shouldn't think of it as a shadow. Maybe we should do it as an extrusion. So, you know, it becomes like a cylinder, 3D space. And suddenly TPAC is a really good starting point. And then as we all grow in our understanding of it, we've all realized there's other things that we can add to our skill base. So that's been very inspirational, Alistair.
While people are still commenting in the text chat, Alistair, if you can move on to the next page. There's just a reminder of our next webinar, and also an encouragement again to, you know, continue the conversation and post further responses in the mailing list once you've had a review of the resources or tried some of the tools. We'd really like you to do that. It may be a bit soon to wish everybody a festive break, but it's our last webinar of the autumn term, isn't it? So, and then I think on the last page we have just a summary of the resource that we've shared and a reminder that it's Creative Commons and that it's created with Xerte, and a small kind of example of how people are using Xerte to for student assessment projects, which include writing projects.
So all that remains is us depressingly to wish you all a very Merry Christmas. And I'm so sorry that we can't be doing it a week beforehand rather than a month beforehand.
Well, there's been a Christmas tree put up in the library already, so I think officially Christmas has arrived.
We got some bar humbugs there from Peter. And we're, you know, if you've enjoyed the session, and I think a lot of you have enjoyed the session, do pass it on. You know, do tell others about it, because this is just the beginning. There's some really interesting things coming out. The sorts of tools that Ron was talking about that are all part of this European project. It's free. We might as well get the best from our European friends as we can whilst we're still part of them.
Rachel said that, you know, it's her first webinar with us and she's really enjoyed it. Rachel, we encourage you to bring a friend next time. In fact, we encourage all of you to bring a friend. If you're experienced webinar attendees, do you know a colleague who could do with a little bit of introduction to the use of technology in teaching and learning and a little bit of CPD? Get them to join you for the webinar.
Great.
And a challenge for those sketchnoting fans out there, you could, when we've made the recording available, do your own sketch note of all the things that we've discussed and commented on. It would be great to see those shared across the mailing list or via Twitter, etc.
You sketchnoters, go get a room.
And Antonella's talked about the webinars being a nice surprise. Do remember that all of them are recorded, and they're on that original link. I haven't got it handy with me. It's XOT something or other.
It's been in the text chat, Alistair.
Yeah,
But
I can pick it out. Here we go. So if you want to see the other ones, the other recordings, I didn't quite pick out all of it, but sorry about that.
Put it in.
Ron's put it in, yeah.
Ron's done it right.
I really like the potential. I think we're about to use them or reuse them as well, but it's a really nice idea if you're running some staff development where you could play back some of the recordings and stop it, making it a blended session, stopping and asking people to interact with the tools that we've interacted with on the webinar. So people can continue to use these formats and ideas beyond the webinar itself.
For those that have joined us before, there's been one or two people that have quite enjoyed hanging around past the kind of 2 o'clock finish time, just to hear us kind of chat. That's not going to happen today because I think Lillian's got to go and I've got to go as well. So we'll be ending the meeting shortly. So thank you for joining us, and I'll stop the recording now.
We could leave Alistair to do a solution.